Today on Great Chat, we look at some of the changes brought on by AI from the lens of people ops. What are leaders doing to recruit and retain top talent in this moment, and how does it differ from past times where employees had more power? I'm Helen, and this week I'm joined by Ashley and guest host Emily, HR Evangelist at Rippling. Great Chat is brought to you by Mercury, radically different banking loved by over 300,000 entrepreneurs. We use Mercury to run this podcast and love recommending it to other founders and fund managers. It's free to get started. Try it for yourself. Visit mercury.com to learn more and apply online in minutes.
Hey, welcome, Emily.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Welcome to the pod. All right, so what happened this week? I will start because I feel like my feed is probably more cluttered with this than both of yours. But yesterday, another AI CMO dropped, and it was like a new agent that does a lot of really clever optimizations for ads. And so this is what we think CMOs do. And I feel like what was different about this one is there was another one that said last year that they were an AI CMO. It was Icon. And they famously raised a ton of money and then spent $4 million buying the domain, which I feel like is now
Icon.com, baby.
Icon.com, which now
friend.com, AI.com. This is a trend.
But I think they crashed out. And so I think this time when another AI CMO dropped, people were skeptical, or a lot of people ran to try it out and were pretty disappointed. So we talk about this 2026 vibe shift, all the tactics from 2025, when they are attempted this year, they're just falling a little flatter, they're just not landing. And I felt like we had a whole cycle in a 24-hour period.
I just think calling it an AI CMO is both clever because it's going to get people's attention and it's controversial and it's
right.
Oh my gosh, the CMO
Rage
is
baity.
a highly strategic role and you've made it into an agent. But you're also setting a really high bar for the product. And so when the product falls short, it's just what do you want? Do you want the attention or do you want the appropriate expectations for someone coming in? And then you do kind of box yourself in on who your customer is going to be, because calling yourself an AI CMO is alienating to people who are actually running marketing teams. So you're basically marketing to the people who don't believe in the value of marketing.
That's such a great point. So that is the point I make all the time, which is if they are wildly successful, eventually they have to move up market and not sell to startups who hate CMOs or hate marketing or don't want it. And they have to eventually sell to CMOs, and then it gets awkward. I've been positioning myself as displacing you and your team for years, but now that I'm moving up market, hello, please give me money. So it's fun to watch.
It's also an interesting insight whenever these tools drop, because I think there's from an HR perspective, there's a lot of AI HR bots, agents, everything coming out, and it's just they're not being built by the HR person or the marketing person.
Yes.
So there's this just really fascinating disconnect of selling and promoting something that is not actually built on the understanding of what the work actually is. And that gives me pause constantly.
But I love it. I love it because it's insert joke here about a CMO at a startup's real role is coming in and picking up all the debt that has accumulated from not having marketing for so many years. Or there's another joke about I hope they're not on annual contracts because so few CMOs make it to a year. And so if it's an AI CMO, it's do they churn out at the same rate too? So it's just a nice reminder for me who's no longer CMOing, this persists.
Maybe that's a good transition to talk about, well, first of all, rumored Meta layoffs, 20% of the company. But, this is where we're seeing a trend that we'll probably get into later in this podcast of people having to train their replacements. And by replacements, I mean AI. And so I think that this is, Emily, what you just said, it's not the CMO generally who's being replaced by AI. This is just clever or not so clever marketing, depending on how we want to look at it. But it's the sort of more entry level people who are like, you know, creating the process docs that will enable AI to take their jobs someday. And we haven't, I think the meta rumors are still rumored, but also seem kind of inevitable. I mean, we talked about this a couple podcasts ago when Jack did the 40% cuts at Block, how that was going to give the rest of the industry permission to do this. But yeah, I feel like if I'm less worried if I'm the CMO. I mean, if you're the CMO, you're worried for different reasons, as Helen said, given the turnover of that. But for younger people, it must be just such a weird time.
It must be crazy because also I feel like younger people, we have this natural cohesion, right? Where like younger people do tend to be the most tech forward, but at the same time, the tech is what's starting to displace them. And we're like, I almost like, I feel like these decisions are a little short-sighted. And this might be like, the bigger question is like if you're going to cut off 40-20% of your workforce, okay, like that's fine, but like what is the ultimate plan? Like what is the talent pool you're going to plan to hire from for the next 10-20 years? Is it going to be a hybrid agent workforce, or do you have to totally remodel your concept of internships and entry level work because you now need to train some basic professional skills and like navigating a workplace? It creates like a much bigger question in my mind than just like, uh-oh, we're replacing jobs. It's much more of like, okay, but where are we 5 to 10 years from now after we've made these
And
decisions?
where are we going?
That's such a
No
great
one's
point.
thinking that
So
far
like,
out, Emily. That's what it feels like.
that's totally true. So like a sales leader I really admire was saying like, gosh, you know, like he's been saying this for like a year where he's like, all of these AI SDR companies, it's great, cool, but SDR is like such a great role to train
Mm-hmm.
AEs, right? And to
Yep.
train like future sales leaders. So like now what's the path? And so that's so interesting. I wonder if in a couple of years, like we'll just start seeing these gaps, right? Where it's like you have these really senior folks and the sort of like gap.
It also, I forget where I was reading this, but like I wonder if it's one of the Substack articles, Ashley, maybe you shared in here, was like talking about how AI is just creating it like it's much easier to iterate and like problem solve, brainstorm, right? It happens so quickly. So the job is turning from doing that work into like making those analyses, decisions off of a bunch of other work. And it's so that to me is also changing what entry level work is it's no longer doing the grunt work of digging through things. You're starting to make those business impacting decisions at a lot earlier of a stage in your career because that's what's bubbling up to you. And so it's also how do you build that judgment for someone who hasn't had the years of sorting through the data to understand the real implications? Like, yeah, it's a fascinating workforce conundrum.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And also, I mean, I think all three of us can imagine with some degree of horror, like what happens when every person in an organization has the ability to just make those like high level, like how do you coordinate all of that, right? And
Yeah.
it becomes like a huge orchestration problem. I saw an interesting post on LinkedIn the other day, and I apologize, I can't remember who it was from, but someone was saying there's nothing more painful than watching an engineering task to ship a product go from weeks of work to 6 hours, but then seeing it wait for another 6 weeks in the queue before it can be pushed, because we have all these tools to make work faster, but we haven't solved that orchestration problem within
Yeah.
companies. And so it's one thing to say, oh, everyone's just empowered now because the execution piece has been solved. But then how do you actually operationalize that within a company? I mean, I think it's probably easy at a really small startup with a handful of people where everyone's sort of like working on the same thing, and really challenging at a company like of rippling size or really any size over like 50, 100 people. One really interesting thing I saw, and this can get us into the like Travis Kalanick is back discussion. Helen, I was thinking of you because I was listening to one of I think it was like a TBPN clip with Travis, which also just made me smile because like Travis is made for the TBPN era
Totally.
of tech media. But he was, I think it was last week where you were, or a couple weeks ago, where you were sort of pounding the table around like, don't build in public when you're a
Yeah.
startup. And obviously Travis has some battle scars from his Uber time and like being very exposed and having a lot of palace intrigue out there. But he was saying like there's something really powerful about stealth mode. Not just it gives you the opportunity to mix things up a bunch, which seems like might be the case. I still can't tell if like Cloud Kitchens is actually just sort of like pivoted to being Atoms or what the trajectory is. But he was saying that building in stealth helps you select for people who don't need external validation and are focused on the work and focused on building. And that is a huge vibe shift, because I think we've been in this era of like performative everything, right? Are you even building if you're not tweeting about building or tweeting about your OpenClaw setup or tweeting about 996? And so it's been the performance has almost like superseded the actual doing. And I saw someone's commentary around like Travis is bringing raw intensity back to tech, and who knows, but I was like, yeah, actually it feels like we've had performative intensity, and I'm sure there is some like raw intensity, but it's been.
What did you think of his manifesto?
I
So dramatic.
it was definitely so dramatic. I was like, do you need a hug? Listen, I think like the drama plays to this moment, and I think that there are a lot of people who are ready for a Travis comeback, and the context of when he was ousted, which I believe is 2017. Does that sound right? Around then,
that's
is
right.
like
16,
so
17.
different than the context today. Like if Susan Fowler dropped her bombshell essay today, would it even make would anyone even care? And so anyway, so like the context, the environment is so ripe for this story. So I wasn't surprised he like played into that. He didn't specifically call out Benchmark or Bill Gurley, but like everyone who was around 10 years ago and maybe even more recently knew what he was referring to. But then it got kind of weird. I feel like this is what happens when founders spend a little bit too much time alone in a room with their thoughts versus putting them out into the world. But who knows, maybe the uncovered truths resonated with an audience that I'm just not in.
To your point of like, what is Atoms? Is it just a renaming of Cloud Kitchens? Perhaps, but no, it's exciting, and I think that I think it has to do with like delivery. I heard he's like autonomous, robotic, last mile delivery of the food produced in the Cloud Kitchens, perhaps. So maybe it's all tied together. Every piece of the value chain, but
AI for the physical world, Helen. That's the vision. I mean, I think it's an exciting problem space, and I'm sure it's intentional to breadcrumb us a bit and have this like very expansive, ambiguous articulation of what Atoms is about, and then as we go, we'll have more details and more information. So so I think it was very successful as a comeback launch. Definitely left a lot of us wanting more, but that's like a good place to leave us.
Adam Newman also had a comeback. Right?
Oh yeah, the video of the flow space.
Yeah. So he had a comeback. And who else did we see? I feel like this week was like ripe for comebacks.
Well,
anyways.
I mean, the whole Uber cast is back, right? So it's not just Travis. It's like Emil Michael is in the Department of War, like talking about Anthropic.
Right.
Shervin Peshever is weighing in on Iran. And then Bill Gurley is on his book tour. I'm just like,
I have a copy.
Wow, 2017 Ashley never could have imagined, fast forward to today.
Oh my gosh.
That this would be where we are. But I guess congrats to all of them for having some very interesting staying power.
Do you feel like any of them were introspective in the past 10 years?
Oh my gosh.
So Marc Andreessen did a podcast, the Founders Podcast, David Senra, great podcast. And there's a clip from it where I think he says something to the effect of, he tries not to be introspective or maybe even too introspective because he's just focused on
No, he's
progress
just
and
not
moving forward.
introspective.
He
Proudly
tries to be
not
as
introspective.
yes, as little as possible. I think that's what he says. And I did not listen to the whole thing. So
He
I
also said it was a modern concept, like that it was sort of invented alongside like therapy.
I think the subtext now seeing, yes, exactly. Now seeing all of the follow-up tweets, because it's like, wow, for someone who's not introspective, you really want to dig your heels
You really
in on
thought
this
about
one.
this.
Yeah, you really thought about this one. It seems like this is a little bit of a pushback on like, the therapy culture we've had, or like a lot of the softening of men. Last week, Ashley saying that this is the masculine era, and maybe,
Well,
Mark's
Zuck
point
said
is,
that, but yes, I think
yes. But it's like
masculine
maybe,
energy.
we're saying instead of going to therapy, you should channel all of that anxiety
You
and
should go to
angst
war.
yes, and start companies and make, VCs a lot of money.
Be in the arena.
Which like is all fine and well, but like to what end, right? Like are you like if you are dead set on making the most money, like that's awesome, congratulations, but like what else do you have going for you? And like what else do you have? I don't know, I'm of the mindset like you might be a little happier. You already have the money, so like introspection might be an interesting activity to tackle. You can
It is
use,
true
you
that
can
the
spend your
billionaires
life
As if
seem
doing
like some of
different
happiness
the
is the
things.
least happy
goal.
people.
I
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, exactly. Twitter is not exactly the collection of like the
No,
happiest people on
I
earth.
no.
So
I thought it was maybe Helen just to continue the context setting. So, it started with Mark saying that he, tries to be as to avoid introspection as much as possible, and then interviewers saying like, actually, this is something that's common across great men of history, and so then they were talking about how like this is a modern concept and people didn't used to like, moan and think about their feelings. And also, I just have to say, there's nothing funnier than talking about the great men of history with the sort of built-in assumption that you are one of them. that very much amused me. But of course, like this was such Twitter bait because, first of all, men love talking about the great men of history. But also, there are so many examples of deeply introspective great men of history who actually, started entire philosophies and wrote books. And, so it was just like perfect Twitter bait. And then like Mark doubled down, but was doing it in kind of a intentionally trollish way. It was very entertaining. Like I had my popcorn and I was just watching the show.
Just like even saying great men of history, I'm like, that doesn't have the positive connotation that you think it does. Like, if we look at the
Oh,
great men
Emily,
of
in this moment.
history, like, I don't think they're all like stacking up to where we think they are. But in terms of introspection, like
well,
Einstein, deeply introspective, deeply introspective. So,
oh
like,
yes, there have been a lot. People have been doing a great job of like, citing a long list of people
yes,
and like evidence that they are quite introspective.
Benjamin
So
Franklin,
yeah,
Socrates.
Napoleon, yeah,
Yeah.
writing long letters to his wife, yeah, all of this stuff. But I digress.
But it is a good example of like the playbook for how to fight online, which is never cede any don't cede an inch. Like
yeah.
Marc Andreessen, instead of acknowledging that there might be some good counterpoints, just like double down ferociously, and that is how you fight on the internet in 2026. So and yes, it makes for good entertainment and a lot of engagement.
Things move very quickly, understatement, in AI right now, and keeping up with potential reductions in force, like at Meta. Today's Tuesday. They haven't done it, even though I guess the rumors have been looming for a couple of days. And of course, Block did their big layoffs a couple of weeks ago now. Ashley and I, who have both we've both been in comms roles at companies, communicating a lot of change, sometimes reductions in force, like during COVID, and we were wondering, like, oh my gosh, what is it like inside of these companies right now? Not only from an internal comms standpoint, but that really stems from like, what does leadership tell their employees? Because I think so much activity that we see on the outside is really around like retention of the best team members, and also, attracting the best talent to the company. And so this week we have Emily Herron joining us. She is now at Rippling. And what is your official role?
Oh
Because
my
I know
gosh.
you're a pretty cool one. But she's
Yeah,
a seasoned people ops leader at some fast growing companies. So excited
I'm
for your new role. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm HR Evangelist at Rippling, which is a hilarious title, candidly. 50% of my work is internal. I'm working with the go-to-market teams so that they can have a better understanding and framing for like the HR,
Empathy.
yeah, empathy for HR. And then externally working on like building a bit of a community and network for HR leaders who are really interested in what the future of HR looks like, right? We've got all of these tools, technologies, and changes coming. It's not the status quo, but we also don't need to panic. So how can we have those conversations and like really lean into our own expertise to move forward? So
I
that's what
love
I'm
it.
working
It's
on.
like, what, yeah, well, what a great role, because I think you really like meet the moment, of course, but it's like you get to actually leverage, all of the experience you've had in your career and talk about like if you were in this role today, right? Like you
Hmm.
deeply understand what the challenges are for everybody sort of in the people function.
And Emily, it's so cool because one of the things I've loved about comms, and I think Helen would agree this goes for marketing too, is like you both live inside and outside the bubble of a company. And I think it helps you bring like a really interesting perspective to the business and help ground people in reality when, like things can get a little crazy inside the reality distortion field of any startup. And so like you are now inside and outside the bubble of the people team. And usually the people team, I guess like there's recruiting, so you have some external touch points, but it is more internal focused. And
Hmm.
so I think that's just like fascinating that you get to play this hybrid like 50-50 role.
Yeah, and candidly, one of the best parts is like an HR or a people role is so busy due to purely the aspect of dealing with people. I have
Yeah.
so much more time now to like talk to my peers, and it's been so fun because like I mean, I know they're all busy, but I'm getting to gather even more like experiences and perspectives, which really is only refining my understanding, but I think is also ultimately really helpful as we're trying to figure out what is going on. Like I get to kind of build that shared perspective across a lot of siloed experiences, quite frankly.
I have had the thought so many times of like, oh my goodness, like are my comms people okay? And I think that would extend to the people as well in this moment.
Yeah, it's a lot of like laugh so you don't cry and like roll your eyes a little bit. I think it's been like, candidly, it's been a really long burnout period for HR folks. Like the pandemic hit and it's kind of been a nonstop barrage of whether you think it's stuff that belongs in the workplace or not, but like a bunch of non-work things coming into the workplace, and you're just not catching a break. As soon as you're like, okay, we did this programming, it's like, well, we're actually thinking about a layoff. And you're like, oh, that was not really where I thought we were going. Yeah. And so it's been a tough time. Folks are feeling burnt out. I think like I mean, being online is challenging right now. It's really challenging
Yeah.
being inundated with like really extremely different things that are going on globally, from like New York Fashion Week to literally bombing. So, like, all of that is kind of how it feels to be an HR person. And I think folks are really just looking for like the bright light, a small opportunity to take a breath, and like really pushing towards like good is like perfect is the enemy of good. Like, how can we get to a good outcome? I think that is really what's driving folks. But yeah, people are a little
So
tired.
like deep pragmatism. Like we have been in more idealized states. It felt like the last time I was like in a comms world, a company, I guess I left in the summer of 2021. So I was in like a pre-COVID and COVID phase of Glossier. And I just remember it was like the people leader, the legal, our GC and me like just in the trenches constantly. And
Hmm.
90% of my time was
Hmm.
focused internally. And I do think we were in this very like, how do we reach this like idealized state of what a company should be? Because employees had so much power. Companies were scrambling to make them happy. I think we all felt this like moral obligation to like build build like this like, future state of an internal culture. But also, and one thing I would love to hear from you, because I felt at the time like it became the responsibility of the company to filter
Yeah.
all external events for a team. Like we, for
Yes.
a while, were doing a like daily newsletter about COVID. And then over time that expanded to include the protests and then like a variety of other political and social issues. And, it slowly tapered, but since leaving Glossier and the comms profession overall, I've had this thought of like, what is the job of a company to translate the world for its team? And where I've kind of landed is actually like the job is probably to create as much like focus as possible and to sort of narrow the conversation internally while acknowledging that people are grappling with all these crazy external things, but not to take on the role, not for the company to take on the role of like, we're going to tell you how to feel about what's happening in the
Yeah.
world. Because I think that's just like an impossible role to have. And I'm curious if that's where things are, and if employees accept that, or they still sort of want the guidance of an employer telling them like what's happening and maybe like how to feel about it.
So that last point I think is really interesting. The pressure to keep employees informed, I always thought was nuts. Like
It was
that
nuts.
part,
It was
yeah, like that is like
nuts.
not our job. Our job as an employer is to make sure you like, I mean, what it felt like it was for a number of years was make sure you have the space to process these things that are starting to impact your feelings, your
Yeah.
experience at work. I think like I mean, I have my own thoughts on, you know, if companies have privatized, if healthcare and employment sponsorship and everything is tied to your employment, like there should be some responsibility on the employer to take care of you and make sure those things are giving
Yeah.
you more than the bare minimum. But on the other hand, I've talked to so many founders and they're like, I didn't build a company to become a spokesperson on like global politics. Like that's not my goal. And so I do think like right now in a very employer favored market, you have like
Mhm.
put the blinders on and focus. And like the way to manage those comms is like hit your mission and your goals really, really hard and like try to acknowledge things without distraction. And that is a delicate balance because where does that line end? Like, where are the
Yeah.
things you stop acknowledging at a certain point? Because we can get really granular from International Women's Day to like, right? Like, there are a lot of recognition opportunities, but where is it all of a sudden you've just, to your point, Ashley, started cranking out a newsletter? Like, that wasn't
Yeah.
anyone's job.
Well, I mean, actually, that actually, you guys have both said this. This idea of the power previously sitting with the employees. Like, let's
Hmm.
double click on that because I think that's important to acknowledge. I think that when you enter the workforce, when you enter tech, is actually very relevant to how you
Hmm.
think about. What is the role of people ops? What is the role of the employer in sort of like your life? And that period, I got to be honest. So like I started working in tech in 2008, and it was probably more similar to how it is now because you had the great financial crisis. Like people, all the banks fell, right? There were people getting laid off, like their systems collapsed. Like there were lots of people who were unemployed. And at Facebook, we actually got a lot of software engineers, who had gone like a more traditional like banking route and said, oh,
Mm.
let me brush up my CS degree and I'll go, join this software startup. And so I think the power sat more with the employer for like a little bit during that period. And I'm reminded of that now. But to be honest, all the years in between, and there have been many, I feel like the power was with the employees. And what I mean by that is, I think after Facebook went public, VC got really, really big. I think tech got really big. And we just had more startups. Every startup, for a while, like hiring was a vanity metric, and
Mhm.
talent almost felt like a justification for evaluation, right? Like, the Dropbox played this game very well, right? Like it was sort of the brain trust and the engineering talent that a company had was sort of equally weighted to the actual tangible like revenue and things like that. And so I think at the time when it was just such a fight to retain, top talent, it was such a fight to recruit top computer science, graduates from top universities. I think that the employees had a lot of power in terms of what they wanted their employer to be for them,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they wanted their CEO to take a stand and to, sort of like be more aligned with their personal values. And I think that I always felt during those periods that like, this is odd. This is interesting, right? This is not what I came into. However, if you were a young person, early in your career, and that's what you came into, and that was like the norm for you, I'm sure now feels insane and dystopian and cruel in some way, like, so it's just sort of
Yeah.
like important to acknowledge like these shifts. And I'm so curious, Emily, like when we worked together, I think it was probably one of the heights. Like I remember the programs we worked together on
Yeah.
specifically around like ESGs and DEI. And like, it's, I don't think that those programs have gone away, but they're not front and center the way that they used to be. And I don't know if there are, and I'm asking you this genuine question,
Yeah.
as you're inside companies, how do employees even like, put a vote or like try to prioritize those programs? Like, how does it work internally? I remember how it used to work, but it's just sort of like, what is the state of like, employee resource groups and all of the
It's
things that we used to see
Yeah, I
and talk about
mean,
more.
Helen, like candidly, did it ever feel like it was like actually the business was truly invested in these things, or almost like, employees were holding their feet to the flames, and so it was a bit of an uphill battle trying to chip away, chip away, chip away. Like my recollection was this is hard, and we don't really have leadership fully bought in. And I don't think
Yeah.
anyone ever really fully had leadership bought in, which makes it, incredibly demoralizing to work on something like that. And then I think when the door opens, culture, the workplace, technology shifts for that to not there not be so much pressure on that, then the leadership that wasn't totally bought into it doesn't have to add an extra sentence to their company-wide emails. There doesn't need to be that slide in every other all hands. It just kind of slowly slips. And like for all of the
Mm-hmm.
people who joined during the time where that was really prioritized, like I would wonder if they felt like the meaningful progress was being made, or if that like reality check hit really early. And I realize I'm giving a doom and gloom answer, but like it was
Mm-hmm.
always a little upsetting to realize like capitalism is gonna win, right? When push comes to shove on these things.
I would say, like, I do think that there were some, like, I worked at an organization where leadership was bought in, but it was reactive. And these programs take a long time to, like having the right inputs. You need to be really thoughtful about it, and you need to be patient on the outputs. And so I
Yes.
do think that, especially in like 2020 and 2021, there were a lot of people who wanted to get to like the ideal end state in a hurry. And
Yeah.
that led to some like more unnatural ways of tackling like very important problems that needed to be like foundational and over time. And I actually think this is where a lot of the DEI backlash came from, not in the core principles, but in how these policies were implemented, because they were implemented wanting to like flip a switch. And you just can't flip a switch on a team and internal norms and processes, just like the way you can't flip a switch on a company's like narrative overnight or brand. And so I'm sure the pendulum will swing again, and we'll want to like flip that switch again. And will we have learned any of the lessons that like, no, these actually, you need to be long-term committed, and you need to be patient, and you need to be thoughtful. And you can't just overnight like have your idealized company culture to meet like this new set of expectations.
Cultural change is long, painful, and it has ups and downs. I do think like the emphasis on DEIB, ESGs, like all of these programs that came out of early to 2020s, maybe even late 20 teens, is like we have refreshed the fact, like the bar of where we're at. Like I feel like everyone is pretty on the same page of like how you do really structured, like non-biased interviewing and hiring. Maybe not everyone's
Yeah.
doing it,
Yeah,
but
there are best
everyone now
practices there.
understands, right? So like
Yeah.
we've made a step forward. It's just not at all where everyone wanted to be.
I think that the disconnect for a lot of tech employees in particular is that technology is measured by the pace of change, right? Like
Hmm.
how much you're improving, on the previous iteration, how much faster something is, et cetera, et cetera. We're obsessed with, exponential growth. And then to have to be told to accept,
Yeah.
that change like this happens on a more human level is I think just difficult to sort of hold those two ideas at the same time. I mean, not to tie it back to marketing, but like this is the conversation I often have with founders about brand, right? Because like founders love performance marketing. You put a coin in, you see what comes out pretty much immediately. Brand takes time because people, it takes time for people to trust, to adapt, to change, to try something new. And so I think that the conversation around this is the same. It's frustrating, to be totally honest. Like, it's been such a long time. We haven't seen meaningful progress in some of like, the statistic around who gets to work in tech and
Yeah.
participate. But I feel like we are optimists on this podcast, and we are hopeful, and we like to have conversations like this to figure out sort of like where are the points, where is the progress, and where are the investment areas that we should be paying attention to.
In this particular zeitgeist, I actually feel that there's very little discussion around like the human impacts and inputs to how we should be thinking about the future organization. There's the extreme of like, we'll have a one person company doing $1 billion ARR, and lots of talk about agentic work, but very little about how that changes what work is like the future of work for the individuals who are part of those companies. And my hope for us as an industry is that we start to have some of those more interesting conversations over the next year. Like, I'm seeing talk of people getting burnout from AI because, Emily, to your earlier point, AI moves you up the stack. You're doing less like execution work and more high level thinking and like bringing different concepts together and coordination. Turns out that's more energy intensive than writing the emails and like doing the fixing your spreadsheet and everything. And so anyways, there's just like so many interesting conversations we could be having about the future of work. Also funny that future of work was like such a hot category
I
however
know.
many years ago. And like no one's really talking about that now. It's just AI,
15
AI,
years
AI.
ago.
Like we're still just
Yeah.
like high on this platform shift, and we haven't double clicked into like what are the fascinating implications, and especially what are the fascinating implications for humans. And I think there are so many positive stories that have yet to be mined, or like interesting questions have yet to be asked. So I'm actually super optimistic, and I just
Yeah.
think like we're going to find a way to make this work for us. But we just need the space to have some of the conversations that seem to just be a little bit dismissed right now, as we're sort of in this like fever dream, and the macro narrative is much more doomerism around AI will take all the jobs. We're going to see these massive layoffs. Like, that narrative is not helpful, and I think it's distracting us from a lot of the far more interesting conversations we could be having.
Love it. Well, thanks for joining us, Emily.
Yeah, thanks, Emily.
Thanks
This
for
was fun.
having me. This was really fun.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Great chat. Thank you for listening to Great Chat. Have questions for us? Make sure to submit them at anothergreatchat.com. See you next week.